Mitchell, you take us away today.
Let's start with the cheers.
Oh, yeah. Welcome, Eli.
Eli, good to
Thank
have
you
here.
so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Cheers
taking
and
the time.
sláinte.
Sláinte. I think this is our first developer.
Oh, wow.
Do you mind being called a developer?
I don't mind. I think that's what it says on my resume. Haven't had a resume in a long time, but if I were to make one, it would say developer.
How'd you get into real estate?
So growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, and my grandparents had stores on Brighton Beach Avenue, and they eventually owned the buildings in which their stores were located. And I think that was a two-prong sort of entree for me in real estate. Number one, I learned I did not want to grow up and work in a bakery. And number two, I sort of was intrigued at what happened when their stores closed down and they had to re-tenant them. And I always say, I got into real estate. It's a compound word, right? Real estate, 2 words. And I like the real part as much as the estate. So, I like to crunch numbers and I like business and I like negotiating. But then there's the real part, right? Which is at the end of the day, there's something there, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a place where people live, a hotel. So I very much enjoyed, seeing the work on the estate side develop into something real. And after college, I worked on Wall Street for a little bit, and I sort of didn't think that was my calling, and I went back to school, and I got a law degree and a master's in real estate finance at NYU. And then I went to go work for the Bloomberg administration, and I worked on land acquisitions.
It's great times, right? There's a lot of rezonings happening, a lot of
Exactly
growth.
right. It was a really, really dynamic time to be working in government. I mean, one, look at who the mayor was. He was one of the most impressive people, I think, in the city's history. And two, that administration attracted a tremendous amount of talent. And three, it was a very ambitious time in New York, and politics were not as fragmented as they are today. And there were a tremendous amount of rezonings that were done, Hudson Yards. In the beginning, what I worked on was land acquisitions for the city for municipal projects like Water Tunnel Number 3, the Staten Island Blue Belt program, and then I got transferred to the New York City Housing Development Corporation, which is the financing arm of the city for affordable housing, and I spent a few years there. At a very, very young age. I was, I think, 26 or 27, so 20 years ago. It was a great experience. Not only was it a great experience in terms of what I learned, in terms of the nuts and bolts of how everything works, but one of the great things in government, and I speak to a lot of young people, and I try to convince them to go work in government, and they look at me like, I'm just blowing them off or giving them bad advice, is, I was 26 years old and interfacing with the top developers in the city. So besides that, I got to know everyone. I also learned a lot from people. But by the age of 26 and 27, I knew Ron Mullis very, personally. I closed a bunch of deals with him, Jeff Levine.
When you closed a bunch of deals, were you helping on the financing side?
We were providing the
tax credits.
Right. We were providing the tax-exempt bonds and the subsidies and the tax credits. That's correct. So not only did I learn, the substantive part of the business, but I also learned from, the people who were really the industry leaders, Peter Fine. I sort of learned not only what they were doing, but how they conducted themselves. And, those were really amazing people who helped shape my career.
That was a similar background to Peter, actually, because he started a non-profit for a few years, right? And then
Peter...
For context, Mitch has a picture of Peter up in his apartment. There's a shrine to him.
Wow.
Big Peter Fine fan.
I will tell you a few things about Peter. I know Peter for 20 years. He's a very, very good guy. I can understand why you would have a picture to him. I always tell people...
In Peter we trust.
Right. He is one of the smartest guys in the real estate business in New York. But yes, he started off as a social worker for a non-for-profit, building supportive housing in small scale, and then eventually was one of the sort of early movers on the larger multifamily affordable side. But he was always extremely, extremely strategic in being at the forefront of what was next. So when tax credit deals became available to larger projects, it was Peter doing it. When inclusionary housing market became very hot, it was Peter doing it. When 421A certificates became the market, it was Peter doing it. He's always been an unbelievably sharp operator.
Wow.
And much of the Bronx today was redeveloped, in part because of people like him and Ron.
Because most of the affordable housing development is driven by financing and tax credits, right? The tax credits were introduced in the 80s, was it? So that's obviously
1986, yeah. So the 1986, the tax code was reformed, led by President Reagan, but actually it was a bipartisan change in the legislation, and they created the low-income housing tax credit, which has provided much of the equity that's produced low-income housing and affordable housing in New York. But yeah, you're right. Affordable housing is just financial engineering, right? So when I go to buy concrete for an affordable housing project, my concrete sub doesn't ask me, hey, Eli, is this going to a market rate project or an affordable project? Concrete costs what concrete costs. So if the costs are not being suppressed, then you have to figure out another way to make these projects make sense, because the rents are suppressed, right? The rents are being artificially lowered to create affordability. So how do you do that? It's a lot of math. It's a lot of tax structuring. It's one of the reasons that at the age of 46, my hairline has receded and my beard is very gray. But to be very candid with you, it's really one of the most viable industries. I don't want to say recession-proof, but big picture, if you build a 100-unit building, you're going to get 50 to 75,000 applications. So there's no lack of demand. There's no lack of demand. The hardest part is not the execution of filling the buildings. It's getting the land, putting the financing together, and all of the approvals, because it is not one government agency that you're dealing with. It's a myriad of financing agencies and regulatory issues. So navigating that is definitely a real challenge.
You've got the perfect background to do that. I mean, this is like if you're talking about the anatomy of a developer, right? So you've got the background at NYU,
Yes.
Then the city background, which I think is what a lot of folks probably are missing. Nobody wants to go and work in government typically.
Correct.
You obviously saw Bloomberg, and you probably were inspired by what he was doing. And then you did a spell at Ackman Ziff.
That's right. So after I left government, I went to go work at Ackman Ziff, because when you leave government at a certain level, you're not allowed to work with anyone that you worked with for a year. So Simon was really great. He offered me a job, and he said, look, I understand that you may leave after a year, but if you're not, you're always welcome to stay. And my passion was to get back into affordable housing development, so I spent a year there, and I'm always appreciative that Simon did that for me. And I learned a lot there too, of great people, and I have a lot of friends who are still there. But I went back, and at the time, Joy Construction, where I'm a principal today, was one of the larger third-party builders in New York, but didn't have a development platform.
Okay.
And I joined in 2007, I think, to build that side of the business, and we did. And we now still have our third-party business, but we primarily build for our own account. But the company actually started, in case you want to shrine to the Joy Construction logo in your house.
There's plenty of space on that wall.
You're going to have a very unique look in your house, I will say that. I'm not sure if Architectural Digest is going to show up, but it's very much, I'm flattered. Joy Construction actually started out primarily building for Peter in Atlantic Development, and I think was the GC on 40 buildings for Peter between 1999 and 2007.
Wow.
And so we still have our third-party business where we build projects for other affordable developers. We have our side of the business where I lead the development side, and we have about 20% of the business that I would say we do what's called, I don't know, I guess the term would be potpourri, like a mix of everything. We've built buildings for hospitals. We've redeveloped the commercial space under the 59th Street Bridge in joint venture with our partner Mad Equities, Jorge Madruga. We put Trader Joe's in there. I've made everybody who lives on the Upper East Side very happy, because they
Including
all
me.
right. You know that Trader Joe's?
Yeah.
So yeah, we did that.
You're welcome, Mitch.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And next time you get your cauliflower hummus, you think of me. And so, we built 2 hotels in New York. We've built several high-end luxury rental buildings. Some we still own, some we've sold. But because the affordable business has always been so steady, it's allowed us to take advantage when opportunities arise. So because we have a steady business in the affordable, whether it's being in a position where we have equity to put out, or we're not dealing with fires, like if you own a bunch of office buildings right now, we take advantage of opportunities in the market. So we're building a 473 unit rental building now on the corner of Tillery and Prince in Brooklyn. That's a 75-25 with 25% of the units affordable. And we rezoned that site from an R6 to a C64 R10 equivalent, and then acquired air rights from NYCHA, which was the first sale of air rights from NYCHA to a private developer. That was not part of a city RFP. It was the first time it was done, even nationally. We had to go to HUD for federal approval. So, we typically take on things that most people say, why would you ever want to do that? You're crazy. But, I have a high tolerance for pain. I have a 15-year-old daughter, so, I can really, going through a rezoning or something is actually a breeze.
Going back to the funding part of it, so obviously the tax credit's been a big driver of it, and then all I hear from developers nowadays is it's going to take 5 years to get money from HPD. Like, how, not saying you have the answer, but like, how is that streamlined so more affordable housing can be built? Because there is a lack of affordable housing today in the city. So
I think, first of all, you have to look at just inflation as a first part of the issue, right? So, construction costs, when I started in this business, were all in for this type of product anywhere from $150 to $180 per square foot. Today, your typical deal is north of $400 a foot. And then I think just the complexities of getting your plans approved and getting through HPD has taken a lot longer. And obviously, with inflationary pressures and limited resources, it's very hard for HPD to commit to do all these projects. So it just means everything gets pushed back a little bit. I think the other thing is, when I started in this business, there were really 7 to 8 people who were active in this business. Now I would say there's 20 to 30.
It's become a lot more popular.
It's become a lot more popular. I don't know if it's mission-based. I don't know if it's people woke up and realized, like, hey, that's a great business.
But there's a higher barrier to entry, right? So not an
So there's a higher barrier to entry for sure. A lot of it is knowledge-based. A lot of it is, remember, this is a public-private partnership structure. So, you need to be the steward of public funds and, gaining the trust of, the powers that be, that, you don't end up making the city look bad on a project. It takes a while for you to become a trusted partner. So, a lot of people, especially because of the timeline, they get dejected and move on. But it has definitely become more challenging. But I think all development in New York has become more challenging just because of the regulatory environment.
Yeah.
Development is a three-legged stool. I've heard it described as that, right? You got capital, construction, and marketing, so you have to be an expert in all three.
For sure. I mean, I tell that my kids ask me all the time. I said, like, what made you become a developer? Like, what do you have to study? And I said, look, being a developer is you're usually the guy in the room that knows the least about each expertise, right? Certainly every engineer knows more than I know about engineering. Certainly every architect knows more. The bankers know more finance than me, but you're putting it all together. It's sort of like the composer of an orchestra, right? All the people in the orchestra play the instruments better than the composer, but without the composer putting it all together, you don't have that, you don't have that synergy, and you don't have that ultimate end product. So, I tell that to everyone all the time. Like, I am actually very, very, very cognizant to be respectful to the people who have real expertise. And my expertise is sort of putting it all together and making sure everyone works nicely together in the sandbox so that the product itself is successful. But the reality is, it's being able to switch your brain from design to legal to financing to marketing, and you just have to jump between subject matter real quick.
What's the most fun part?
Oh, what's the most fun? Definitely, I mean, for me, I would say it's twofold. One is when you close an affordable deal and you see how many parties came together to do it. It's usually 3 or 4 government agencies, a bank, a financial institution that's buying the tax credits, lawyers representing every tranche of the capital, and you get that closing email that you did something that should not make sense, right? You should not be able to build something for rents that are lower than market, right? I mean, it just goes against your basic economics 101 theory, and then you see all these talented people come together and financially engineer and use public policy to get a project like that done. When the emails start going around, thank you, thank you, thank you, and you see how many people were involved in it, it sort of, A, gives me confidence to do the next one, that you see there's so many people committed to this cause and industry. And that is definitely, one of the things that I still love. And then the second thing is when, a project is finished and stabilized and people are living there, sometimes I'll just go and walk around and just watch, and you think to yourself, like, these are people's lives, and somebody's life got better because they were in an apartment that was brand new, or staying in a hotel room that I helped build and design, and you see people enjoying it, and you think to yourself, that's what it was all about. Like I said, there's the real part and the estate part, and I was never able to separate the two.
Which development stands out as something you're especially proud of?
So when I first started working at Joy, there was a project called St. Anne's Terrace, which was a 3.5-acre site on 156th Street. And St. Anne's, it goes from 156 to 159th and goes all the way through to Eagle Avenue. There was a elevation on the site of difference of about 40 feet from Eagle to St. Anne's. And it was the original location of a large brewery in the Bronx that had been taken down, and it was a vacant piece of land, and it was rezoned. And just as we finished the rezoning, it was 2008. And two things happened in my life in 2008 that had a huge impact. Number one, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, and being fully drawn on a land loan in the Bronx that was coming due was not a wonderful place to be. And then I think the day after Lehman went bankrupt, my daughter was born. And I just remember thinking to myself, I guess I am going back to go work in the bakery in Brighton Beach.
The risk tolerance is off the charts for developers. That's one thing I think that's really underestimated by everybody.
So yes, it's yes and no. When I was younger, I let it get to me more. And now, having been through 2008 and COVID, I think I've learned, growing up, I grew up out in Brooklyn by the beach. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with riptides. So, a tide can come and it can suck you out. And many people drown in riptides, especially in Miami. It's a big problem in Miami, because what they try to do is they try to swim against the tide back to shore. And if you do that, you have no chance, because you're swimming against the tide, you tire out, and unfortunately people drown. So how do you get out of a riptide? You don't swim to shore, you swim sideways. And I sort of learned that, in development, assuming you're not doing anything illegal, which obviously is something, I frown on tremendously. You can't swim against the current. When COVID happened, I remember speaking to one of our lenders in one of our buildings in Hudson Yards, was 50% vacant. And they asked me, what am I doing? And I said, I'm doing nothing. I said, what do you think I'm doing? I was like, do you think if I held up a sign outside and I said apartments for rent? I said, everybody left. I said, we're not allowed to show apartments. Like, what do you mean, what am I doing? I was like, I'm watching Netflix with my kids. That's what I'm doing. As you have to sort of learn that these things come and go. And a lot of it is relationship based. Going back to that St. Anne's project, what looked like a project that was going to be foreclosed on is today a 641 unit mixed income community with about 70,000 square feet of commercial space. And a lot of it was working with relationships that I had for years to bring 3 banks back to the table, to find someone to buy the tax credits, to get the city to finance it. I think had I just tried to, sort of bull rush it and swim back to shore against the current, probably wouldn't have worked out. But I think I learned, early on, someone once said that, your greatest dreams and your worst nightmares are seldom realized. Having been through a couple of, really bad turns in the market, you're still alive, you're still in the game. Yeah. You don't need to, swing for the fences. You try to win on points. It's like boxing, right? Only in the movies does they get knocked out so quickly, right? Usually it's a game of points. So, yeah, your risk tolerance is really high, but you also realize that, as you're going along, you're building up a toolbox of skills to help you in those difficult times. And second of all, you're building up a large network of colleagues and friends who you can give a call to and say, hey, look, I'm going through a difficult time right now. How do we work through this together? So yeah, for sure your risk tolerance is really high, but being primarily in the affordable space has sort of lowered my risk profile. But we built the civilian hotel on 48th and 8th, and we were topped off and enclosing the building when COVID started, and our construction loan was half drawn, and I had a building that was half finished, and the thought that there may never be a tourist in New York ever again was a very realistic thought at that point.
Very real. Yeah.
Very real. And you had a choice right then, and we spoke with our lender, and we were like, "Do you want to freeze the project? Do you want to do this?" And they were like, "No, we don't want to have building." So we worked with our lender, and we finished the building, and we opened it up, and it's one of the more desirable boutique hotels in the city right now. So one, it's patience and time, and the other thing is at the same time we had a very robust affordable practice, so that propped us up. So I think it's about not putting your eggs in one basket. I think people who got hurt were people who only did office or only did commercial or only did hotels. And then when you had shockwaves in that specific industry, obviously it's hard to, it's hard to overcome that. I've always tried to diversify our business, but, keep the main anchor of it being the affordable side.
You seem very creative in your land acquisition. Like, the sites you've acquired over the years, have they typically been from brokers, or they like someone come to you presenting an opportunity?
It's a mix of getting to know owners. It's a mix of brokers. I'm very fortunate. I have a great partner in my also very good friend, Jorge Madruga, is the truffle hunter of finding deals. Yeah, like people always, I always joke around with people and I say, if you looked at Jorge and I, you would think that I'm the brains and he's the good looks. And I always say the reality is he's both. But he is extremely creative in finding deals and sites. Some have come through brokers. Some have come through direct meetings with owners. I'm more on the execution side, but I have, acquired sites. I'm more on the execution and disposition side. And I'm very lucky that I've always had partners. And once you build up a track record, people come to you. I tell that to people come to me a lot and say, "Here's this piece of land. What should we do?" Yeah. I try to be disciplined. I mean, especially in this environment, not to chase deals because, like I said, I'm neither the good-looking one or the smart one, but I know I'm not smart enough to borrow money at 10, 12% and have a 5-year runway to get a project done. Whatever basis you are, your basis creep at that cost of capital is going to be extremely, accelerated.
Just your carrying costs, particularly if you're trying to get money from HPD, it's going to take so long, so it's going to be very expensive to carry the project.
Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. So, I'm very disciplined. I try to make deals with owners and have them, if they have an existing business there, try to keep their business in place for a couple of years. So it's a covered land play. While we were rezoning the site on Tillery, we had a storage operation there that helped us cover our financing costs and rezoning costs. So it's trying to, mitigate your risk. That's really what it is. I try not to get ahead of my skis, which is really important because I can barely ski. So that's how, disciplined you have to be in terms of managing your risk, because it's easy. First of all, everyone in our business, we're all deal junkies, right? Like, all of us should be in rehab for loving deals. We could talk about deals all day long, read about deals all day long. It's in our blood, right? And so the reality is you have to be very, very disciplined to sort of say, like, look, here's where I think we are in the market, and you try to build your portfolio to match that.
Where do you think we are today?
Where are we today? I would say...
you should take a drink of that mimosa. I feel like we're pounding you with questions.
No. It's a good question. I guess, given your accents, I can't use a baseball analogy, so I'll use a soccer analogy. I would say we're like in the 60th to 70th minute in that sort of way. It's raining. The field is all muddy. It's cold.
Everyone wants to go home.
Everyone wants to go home. I think, look, inflation was a real issue, and socially, I think you see the impacts of it. You see a lot of frustration in society. I think you see our politics are very fragmented. I think you've seen a real erosion of like middle class affordability, housing affordability. Inflation is a real issue, but raising rates at the speed that they did, to me, impacted real estate more acutely than it did bringing down inflation, and I think you're seeing it. I mean, I think just this morning, inflation numbers came out that still reflected, some serious inflation in the system. The average American feels inflation in two areas: their groceries and their gas for their car. And those two issues are really not purely interest rate driven, right? Obviously, your groceries are impacted by global shipping, and we know there have been interruptions to that due to conflict. Obviously, Ukraine is one of the biggest exporters of grain, and that's been interrupted by the war with Russia. In terms of gasoline, obviously, that's very much controlled by price setting of countries who are producers. So, we in the real estate industry got socked in the face by interest rates going up by 450, 500%. So, I think we're in the 60th to 70th minute of a game that, will end in, some sort of tie and just misery. Like, there's not going to be a lot of happiness. I'm very fortunate. I'm not very exposed on the office side. I think office is going through a real, transformational change. You guys are both from Europe. I think that, European offices, London, Berlin, are much more back to work than the United States is. And I think at this point, right, I think, we were past the after Labor Day, after the Jewish holidays, after Christmas, right? Like, we're past that. I think this is
The new normal.
this is the new normal. And so I think office is going to go through a major repricing. And I think, here in New York, I think you saw the rent laws of 2019 throw a real wrench into the multifamily market, which was, I think, one of the more actively traded markets. So I think it's been a brutal few years in real estate. I also tell people when they cry to me, like, you weren't crying to me when we were financing deals at 2.5%, right? So you got to take the good with the bad. But I think it's going to stabilize soon, right? I think it's going to stabilize soon. In terms of multifamily, right? Like, I can sit here and cry, or I'll teach you guys a good word, kvetch. I don't know if you know that word, kvetch. It's the Yiddish word for complaining, right? Like, every real estate guy can kvetch about, the rent laws. But I don't know if you guys saw, since 421A has been discontinued, there have been so few housing starts. So I think that means, there's going to be a lack of apartments, which I don't think socially is a good thing. But if you own multifamily, right, I think that's going to bring values back. So, look, like I said, it's real and estate. So there are going to be capital markets events like interest rates going up, but then there are going to be real issues like there's just less housing starts, and the city is going to grow. So I think there are pluses and minuses on both sides, but there's a lot of, from what I hear anecdotally, there's a lot of equity sitting on the sidelines looking, to be smart. It's always scary to be the first mover, but you're starting to see financial institutions. Blackstone's mortgage REIT reported very strong earnings earlier this week. KKR, less strong, but I think they sort of reduced their dividend because they took back a few assets and going to use that cash to reposition those assets. So I think we're at the part where this is it. It's no longer a year ago where everyone was like, oh, this will be over in a few months. I think people realize okay, this is the new reality. Rates will come down, within the next year or so. It's no longer a question of rates going up. It's just when are they coming down? So, it's like the roller coaster. In the beginning, you're going up, 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 up. But eventually, you come back down. And I think we're much closer to that. As you get much closer to that, that's where money is made, right? Once rates start coming down, if they come down quickly, asset prices will go back up. So it's the early movers who are going to get the worm. And I think you're starting to see that. I think you're starting to see people say okay, I'm going to do a deal because if I do a floater now, my exposure for rates going up are nil. But maybe by December, my base rate is 75 basis points cheaper. That has real economic value.
Because despite all the challenges going on, the land values in the Bronx, at least, have been continuing to go up.
I think that's twofold. Number one, I think affordable housing has been insulated to some extent from these market conditions, and I think number two, going up was also a function of where they started, right? They were very, very low. I started in this business. Land was $15 to $30 a foot in the Bronx, and I think if you could find a deal in the 60 to 80 range today, you would say you have a pretty good basis. I mean, people send me deals all the time at $140 a foot for land in the Bronx. That's not going to work. but it's at least reflective of the fact that like somebody is optimistic to that level. Like I don't think they're, intoxicated with that number. I think they're probably at the high end, but they're in the range.
Yeah.
And you're talking years ago, it was $20 to $30 a foot. It's a function of a few things. One, there's available land in the Bronx. Many other boroughs don't have that. And number two, there's a high concentration of affordable development there, and that's a product that, like I said, has been insulated from these capital markets, disruptions. So I think it's just, pressure of demand. And like I said, there's just more people doing affordable housing these days, so they're going to drive up the price of the end product.
That makes sense.
Could you walk through a deal, say, from inception? So a developer like you, I think it's fascinating just to see how you put it all together. So from, say, that St. Anne's one that stuck out in your head as something you were particularly proud of, how did that come about from the time, say, a broker calls you? Did a broker call you? Was it off market? At what point do you partner up with somebody, negotiate the contract? How long do you typically need?
Well, I think, look, if somebody were to show me a piece of land today, the first thought in my head is I have a year between just to get through DOB, right? Like even if I don't want to build this at the end of the day, but if I wanted to get approved plans, that's a year in itself if everything goes right. So, the first thing I do when I look at a site is, all right, what am I going to spend my first year on, right? There's a pre-development budget, plans, filings, legal. So obviously if you have to buy the site, then you have carrying costs, interest rates. So the first thing that I try to do, with a deal on inception is how far can I push off actually buying the site and still control it.
Right.
Obviously, that's the dream. You know what I'm saying?
And we tried to fight you on that.
You try to fight us on that.
Yeah.
Okay,
'Cause
correct.
we want to close.
Correct. It's like the
Brothers
boyfriend-girlfriend thing. She wants to get married. You're saying,
Right.
oh, let's be friends. It's the same thing.
When
right?
is the
Like,
closing date?
When is the closing date? When is the closing date, right? Like, when are we going to see the priest or the rabbi?
Right, exactly.
And so the reality is, that's the first thing I try to do is you try to build a runway. The second thing I try to do is figure out, how can I be different? I'm 5'10", 200 pounds. I don't do anything special. I can't dance. I can't sing. So I have to differentiate myself and my product. So it's about choosing a neighborhood that, maybe there's something the city is interested in investing in that neighborhood. So when I see sites in East New York now, I'm a little bit, it's a yawn for me because that was 5 years ago.
Right.
The city did the rezoning. They invested a lot there. They weren't going to be, I'm not going to stand out going into HPD right now and saying, oh, I have a great affordable site in, in East New York that's, it's not going to move the needle much. Look, they want the units, don't get me wrong, but I try to think like, how am I going to differentiate myself? So, we were one of the early movers in Inwood because we knew the city was studying the area for rezoning. And I knew that once the rezoning would be passed, obviously I didn't anticipate, the level of litigation and all that, but I knew once the rezoning was passed, that there would be, significant desire for investment in Inwood. So that's the second thing that I do. From the capitalization point of view, the deals today are very large. The affordable deals, when I started doing a 60 or 70 unit project was very standard. Now I do 400 or 500 unit projects at a time. And so making sure that there's availability of capital. There aren't a ton of lenders that have the balance sheet to do that. So I'm always managing my banking relationships that, not only do I have the relationships, but that I have room on their balance sheets for when I need to go. And then it's basically knowing and getting a real sense of, from the city, like, when do you see me closing this deal, right? Because then I can start to make execution decisions. And then it's a lot of local politics, right? Speaking to the community board, what do they want? Do they want supportive housing? What income tiers do they want? Because, if you're going to go in to do a affordable housing project, which, like I said, is a public-private partnership, if you go in there and you are proposing a project that is, opposed by the local council person or the borough president or the community board, you're not going to get very far. So you have to also sort of take stock of, what's being asked for you. And I sorry to always tell stories of this business, but when I started a long time ago, we were doing a lot of projects in Harlem when I worked for the city, and all of a sudden, people did not, wanted affordable housing in Harlem. They wanted low-income units. They wanted low-income units. Well, meanwhile, the neighborhood went through a tremendous renaissance. I think to some extent because of the investment of the affordable units, and the neighborhood became much better. And then people started screaming, "We don't want affordable units. We don't want affordable units."
Wait, so what did they want?
They wanted like middle income and higher income levels. So we tried to cater to that. And then when we catered to that, they were like, well, we want to go back to having more affordable units. So, it's definitely a bit of a wash cycle, as is everything in life, right? You go around in circles many times, but, it's really putting together. I mean, if you speak about affordable housing, that concept was drilled into my head very early in the game of this public-private partnership. And I think it's one of the reasons that not everybody goes into that business, because some developers either don't have the patience, the wherewithal, the background to navigate the public side of it. But the reality is you're constantly balancing those two issues, right? You don't get to build whatever you want, right? Because you're not going to get very far by saying take it or leave it to the city of New York, who's lending you money on very attractive terms, if not free, in terms of the tax credits. So, you have to be flexible, and you also have to realize that while yes, you're the developer, you're also the steward of public funds, and basically the steward of the city in terms of building affordable housing. So you can't just say this is my way or the highway, and this is what I'm building, and I want to build all studio apartments, or I want to build all 3 bedrooms. A lot of it is statutory and programmatic, so it's being flexible.
Yeah. If you take the funding, you have to be willing to play ball with them.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you look at the location. It sounds like where is interesting to HBD? Where would they be?
For sure.
Be bullish on. Then you think about, okay, how do I keep capital available for as long as possible? So you want to kick the can down the road on closing on the actual property.
Absolutely.
Get in front of the DOB, get your plans in, which can take about a year. And all the while, are you like paying for that property typically, or are you just under soft contract?
It's a bunch of ways you can do it. I mean, one of the ways you can do it is, like I said, if the landowner has an operating business there, you can
that would be perfect.
That's the dream.
Right.
The supermarket operator or manufacturing, that's the dream.
Patient, willing
Correct.
to wait for the big payday. You
Correct.
have to pay a little bit of a premium then, right?
You do, but there's an offset because they're still making their income.
Exactly.
And look, it all depends how you define a premium. I'd rather pay the landowner than a bank.
Right.
So to me, it all boils down to how much.
Right.
And if I either pay Peter or I pay Paul, but at the end of the day, my basis is my basis.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a premium, but at the end of the day, the aggregate basis is probably roughly the same. The second issue is, if you really think, and again, it's become much more challenging to do this, if you think you have the opportunity to rezone something, you can go to an owner and say, hey, look, if you give me an 18-month or 24-month closing cycle, I can, instead of you selling me 60,000 square foot buildable, you could be selling me 360,000 square foot buildable. Is that buildable? Is that worth, a 2-year horizon to you? You would think that 6 times, your sellable, buildable air rights is worth waiting 2
literally
years,
money out
right?
of thin air.
Exactly. It's money out of thin air is exactly right. So, you try to be strategic with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes partners come to you with deals that are further along. It's like I said, it's just completely being flexible. That's the most important part of being a developer, and especially an affordable housing developer, is sort of being flexible. We have a lot of non-for-profit partners. They think differently than private developers do. They're mission-based. They have boards. Their capitalization structure about signing guarantees are different. You sort of have to learn to get along with everyone. It's definitely challenging, and especially because at the end of the day, while it is mission-based for I think all of us, it is a business. I do have 2 children in school and have to send them to college, so you have to figure out a way to do the right thing, build a great product, but also, eke out a small living doing it.
Right. So you go ahead, you close on the site. Just if you were buying the development site, you have to dig a big hole in the ground, and then
Yes.
like, are you literally running the construction crew do Joy Construction like self-build and self?
Yeah, we're the general contractor.
That's where I have to imagine there's a nice margin to be saved then, right?
And clearly, you're building for yourself. You control the process, and the economics are better. Me personally, you know,
Do you like that part?
no, I had a very serious injury in the construction business. I cut myself writing a contract with a paper cut, and
Soft hands.
after that, I am a soft hands construction guy. I can talk a lot about it. I can, I negotiate all the contracts. I can do all of the soft part of construction financing, lien issues, and things like that. But the actual construction, I have an amazing team, and actually the two founders and my partners at Joy Construction really focus on that. And I focus much more on the paper clip and paper cut side of the business. But I get a lot of free hard hats, and I bring them around, and every once in a while
You get to point at things.
Yeah, I
and
get to
people
point
take
at things
photos
and stuff like that. Right. And
because you need that. I'd say that construction business is so hard. I mean, if you don't know how to build, it must be so hard to tell. You're telling some like fairly tough guy about how to pour concrete or how to.
Oh, for sure.
And he's telling you why it can't be done, but like a lot of the time, I feel like when you don't know construction, you obviously don't know what you don't know.
That is correct. Like I said, in an office setting, I know as much construction as I need to.
Yeah.
And, in interfacing with the people that I interface with,
Yeah.
Lawyers, bankers, government officials, clients, bank representatives, equity representatives, I can handle myself fine. But if, I was actually on a real construction site. So here's the test, guys. If you want to know who's really in construction and who is a paper cut guy like me, so this is the litmus test. You ready? You look at their shoes. Any guy wearing Converse, John Varvatos, Converse All-Stars, and is talking about construction, you can call their bluff.
An armchair construction guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I am an armchair construction guy. But like I said, there are two parts of construction. There's the in the field stuff, which is not my forte and expertise, and then there's the office stuff, which I do sort of oversee and run. And it's a lot of paperwork. It's we're doing 6 to 8 projects at a time. It's doing requisitions from several different institutions. So there's something to be said, but I do it all in in sneakers and the comfort of my office. That's right. Except for that one paperclip incident, I've remained never again. That's right.
So this is where the rubber meets the road. You have the construction guys moving along, right? Now it's all about timing, right? Because if you go 6 months over, I don't know if that's as tight for affordable, but if you go over on time, the numbers get killed really fast, right?
Look, in any development, you go over on time. Your carry costs eat into you. But in affordable, it's even more pronounced because the equity is provided by tax credit equity. And the person who's buying those tax credits to you can only take delivery of those tax credits once you start to lease up the units. So if there's a delay in that, you're delaying giving them their tax credits, and that destroys their return, right? So if I was going to be giving you credits in 2024, but now you just found out that I'm not going to be giving you credits in 24, I'm going to be giving them in 25, all of a sudden you have tax liability, right, in 2024 that you didn't expect. So your return on your investment in my tax credit deal, one from a net present value point of view and also from an actual cash point of view, gets diminished. So yeah, timing is a disaster. And I think, one of the things that I've always spoken about, and I've gotten nowhere with it, is, I do believe that there should be an easy pass lane for affordable projects, because when I go into the Department of Buildings, I'm competing for the same resources, the same with Con Edison or Keyspan, of somebody who's building a luxury condo. And I obviously do not have the same budget that someone who's building a luxury condo does, but I'm going through the same approval
That's
process.
interesting.
So I've always said, it would be great if there would be like an HOV lane,
100%.
Something that I can fast track, because to be candid, that carry cost adds into the development costs, and it's really tough. So to be candid with you guys, that's something that I've always spoken about, and on some level, the city has done it in pieces, but there's no official fast pass lane. There are some sort of routes, but there's no one way, where your project gets a stamp and says okay, your inspection times are faster, your response time from Con Edison has to be faster, this, that, still not there.
Unreal.
Wow.
So you're going through that then. How long does that take? So it's a year to get DOB plans, then you're building. How long is a building, say for like you're building what, 300-400 units on?
So a 250 to 300 unit
250.
building is like 28 to 34 months
Okay,
to
so
get a TCO and then a
2.5
year
to
to lease
3
up.
years.
So it's a 5-year.
5 year.
It's a 5-year cycle.
Does it take a year to lease up an affordable building, even though there's so many applications?
So it didn't used to, but right now, paperwork is backed up, and also the median income in New York has gone up so much that the rents are not as suppressed as they used to be.
Okay.
And so, it used to be if market rents were $1,000 and you could rent an apartment for $400, the appetite and demand for that was insatiable. When the market rents are $1,000 and you're renting at $800, $850, people are a little bit more picky. They may win the lottery, walk the apartment, and be like, I don't like this. And when it was $400, they would sign without even looking. Now I have people who win the lottery, walk the unit, and say, this isn't for me.
Wow.
The AMI structure is interesting because, as you know, the challenge of the Bronx with 421A was the 130 AMI band, which wasn't truly affordable. Which
Correct.
wasn't truly affordable.
Too high.
Right,
Yeah,
too high.
yeah.
So that's correct. So yeah, in the Bronx, the 130 AMI was,
But why did they initially allow that? That's interesting.
well, because, the legislation was state legislation. It didn't go by county.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
it's hard to really get down to that granular level
I see.
and sort of say like, oh, well, this AMI here, this AMI there.
Yeah.
I mean, to be candid with you, the people who were unsuccessful filling those units, the developers, shame on them, right? Because there were other options that they could have taken, and they chose the highest income tier and they couldn't fill it. I mean, that's just basic marketing, right? Like,
Yeah.
you should have known that you're not going to be able to get somebody for that rent, where the affordable rents were higher than the market rents. Right?
Yeah.
Something,
What,
right.
what are your thoughts on this Not Haven resurgence? I don't know if you've seen Brookfield's project,
Sure.
but it's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. Look, first of all, it's the waterfront, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like
Any
waterfront.
premium
living.
around the world.
Right. It's on the waterfront. And number two, like I said, I remember, doing some of these speeches when I was young. Now I'm old. I've seen waterfront developments, revitalize a bunch of neighborhoods. I mean, I was saying I grew up in Brighton Beach. There was the Oceana development that was a huge vacant piece of land and was redeveloped. And, I remember they were selling condos in the early 2000s for $1,000 a foot in Brighton Beach. I was like, that's crazy. And, it worked. Sometimes it may take a little bit longer. But I think the Brookfield site, that little pocket of the Bronx, is a really cool niche. And, you've seen a lot of market rate projects come in there. And so, if you go back to, I think one of the first developments in that area was a large low-income project that Atlantic Development did.
Yes, yeah.
And then, from then, you've seen more and more market rate projects. J. Cow, Josh Weissman.
RXR there.
Right, RXR.
It's a bit like bees around honey, right? As soon as a big plant's flag, they all start to follow.
Right. Well, look, it's also when you're going out into untested waters, the second one person proves something, even if it's short-lived. Now you have the comps to run around to a bank and say, hey, this works, right? Like, hey, this works.
It's fresh.
It's no longer your theory. You have some data.
Yeah. Is that a smart business plan to follow a Brookfield around?
I think Keith Rubenstein originally put the whole thing together, right?
Keith
And he sold it to
Rubenstein, yeah,
Brookfield.
exactly right. So look, yes and no, right? Obviously, the guys at Brookfield are really smart.
But they're like
they're a public
they're
company.
Placemaking, right?
Right.
They're too big.
They're a
fail on
public
this.
company, and their pocketbooks and ability to withstand,
Right, they have
the
holding
time-
power over
They
it.
have
They
holding
could wait a
power
decade for that
over-
place to pop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So they have a very different.
So you gotta be
timeline
careful.
on this. You have to always be very careful.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's not just where, it's who.
Mm.
Right? I had an older brother. He once said to me, it stuck with me. It says, "It doesn't matter what people say; it's who says it." Right. So when Brookfield says, we're really happy with our investment there, you have to remember it's Brookfield, right? They're paying a 4% dividend
Right.
to their shareholders. I can't live on a 4% margin, right? So it's not just what they said, it's who said it, right? Like a guy who wants to go build 100 units and says, wow, Brookfield's project was so successful. Well, no offense, you're not Brookfield. You know what I mean? Like you have a different capital structure than them, you have different holding power than them, you have a whole different
Right.
mindset. And,
Yeah.
the realities are totally different.
Yeah. What are the numbers on that Brookfield side? It's crazy, right?
I think
It's
they're getting in the 60s, right? $60 a foot?
Yeah, they think got $7,000 for 1 3
Yeah, are they
Which
renting?
you hear that number, $7,000 for apartment Bronx sounds huge, but generally it is like, the 50, 60 year range for.
And
Look, the reality is also when you hear rents, what you never hear is the concessions.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
like a
And I
couple
don't
of
know
months
if there
free
are.
or-
I don't. I'm
yeah.
not.
I think they were giving concessions.
Right,
Yeah.
but you never hear that. Nobody's ever like, I got $8,000 and I gave 7 months free rent. Nobody ever says that. They just say the $8,000 part.
Right,
Right.
right.
So that's the reality.
Yeah, yeah. And during your development process, are you making money at that point? Like the 5 years while you're banging it out, you've seen any return?
So look, obviously, if you're running a business, you have to stagger, right? You have to stagger your. When I look at my pipeline, I don't just look at it as in terms of how many units. It's a question of when, right? So I need to have projects in different phases of the development process so that I can smooth out cash flow and run a business. If I just started 5 projects at one time, it would be very challenging, right? Because that would all be money out.
Right.
I have to have money out and money in.
This is why sometimes you hit a developer and you've got a really nice lot, it's perfect for them, but the timing's off, and it's so frustrating.
That happens all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
You're like, this is perfect for him.
Of course,
Yeah.
all the time. This is perfect for him.
His pipeline's
but
full.
His pipeline's full, or he has a project that's giving him a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
At that time, it's all timing, 100%.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I've said no to projects that were great projects for me just because they didn't fit into the timeline. Right? It's a, like I said, it's an ecosystem.
Right.
Right. I need to have projects that are leasing. I have to have projects that are starting. I have to have projects that are in pre-development. I mean, it's 2024 right now, although I still sign all my checks 23. It takes me to it's like Memorial Day every year until I get it right. By that time, it's already 25. But the reality is, I'm already thinking like 25, 26, 27.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have to, I don't want to wake up in 2026 and, not have a pipeline. So you're constantly, building up like a 7-year sort of horizon. And in that time, the worst part is things change a lot. And so you have to leave flexibility.
Right.
Particularly these like condos. I was reading the book Billionaires very recently.
Yeah.
Talk about the timing, the condos there. That's the risk they're taking is unbelievable. It's like-
Unbelievable.
Like-
I mean, look, the risk they're taking there is unbelievable, but the thought is, I wouldn't want to live there personally, but the thought is it's the most desired
Yeah.
location.
You
in
got
the
a global
Western
audience,
Hemisphere.
yeah.
Right? You have a global audience, and there are people in the world that have that type of money, and if they have that type of money, that's where they're going to want to live, right? You don't hear a lot of people who are looking for a $70 million apartment say like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna go tour the Mott Haven Brookfield site. Like that's where they go, right? Like that is literally the only place they go.
Interesting. I actually met the development director of the Brookfield site on there, and he was saying they had a lot of interest from people out of town. Like you look at New York as a map, right? You see South Bronx very close to Midtown,
Right.
And so it's gonna be interesting to see like if they renew the leases over the time. They want to stay
As
there.
people, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, look, it changes. Before COVID, a lot of my buildings had a lot of foreign students. That's gone down. When I started in my career here, most of the tenants, in our market rate buildings were Wall Street. It's changed a lot. There's a lot of technology tenants, a lot of fashion. New York is constantly changing, and that's why, affordable housing is so important, so that we don't end up being a city of, just a bunch of, Wall Street people or lawyers or bankers. Not that anything wrong with that, but I think diversity is one of the reasons that people love to come here. And look at us in this room, right?
Exactly.
I'm like the
UN
most
in here.
right. Like I'm the most American in here, being first generation American from Brooklyn. Like I'm basically Thomas Jefferson in this room.
Your grandparents were
Right.
proud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's what makes New York so interesting.
Yeah,
is like,
definitely.
look, it attracted all of our families here in this room, and if you don't create sort of a infrastructure for diversity, both economically, culturally, employment-wise, I think you end up with a really boring city. A lot of people who left New York during COVID. Are not so happy, right? There's no place like living
They're
here.
coming back, aren't they?
They're coming back. Maybe we'll let them rent to Brookfield in the Bronx.
Any locations or neighborhoods that are not widely known to be up and coming that you feel are ones to watch? Speculative betting here.
I think Queens has a big runway in terms of development. It's mostly been in Astoria and Long Island City, but I think as you go out,
Like Jamaica?
Jamaica, Flushing, Ridgewood. I think there's some opportunities there. Look at Coney Island. I know we have someone here in the room who's from there. There's been, you
Shout out to Lyra.
Yeah, shout out to Lyra. The reality is there's been a lot of construction there. Again, waterfront, right? So I think I think the Rockaways are seeing a tremendous amount of development. When I grew up, nobody went to the Rockaways. Now try to get on the ferry Sunday morning to go to the Rockaways to the
Yeah, it's
beach,
busy.
and it looks like a line that they're giving away free candy. Like I've never seen anything like it. And so that's changed a lot. And so we're getting to the point also where unless we start to make significant changes in land policy, we're not going to have land. So the reality is we have to be both intelligent in our policy. Otherwise, this comes to a big halt.
What are your thoughts on the 421A? You think there might be
Yeah, any
backlash?
chance? Any chance of it coming?
It's an impossible question to
So-
answer, I suppose. But
I think we're in a better position than we were last year.
at least they're talking about it, right? That's a good sign.
Well, I think they were always talking about it, but I think now that the impact of the housing starts,
Yeah.
it's such an impactful number how low it was. I think it's a little bit easier. I think you also have a governor that has a little bit more runway behind her in terms of being an incumbent and popularity and won an election. But it's a tough one. That's a tough one. It's a shame because I don't need 421A.
Yeah.
Why don't we just change the tax laws so that multifamily rental buildings don't pay 30% of their gross? What people don't realize is 421A is a fix to what I think is a draconian and unfair tax regime.
It should be permanent.
Yeah, why don't we just work backwards and fix the property tax?
Brian from there.
Yeah, well,
That will be my platform.
First Irishman.
that
Just
that
work
that
backwards,
would be
everybody.
right. That would be really wonderful, but we couldn't even get an extension on the back end of 421A last year when the legislature went out. So doing like major tax reform, I think is like the same odds of me winning the New York Marathon, right? Like very, very, very remote. It could happen, but
You seem determined.
Right.
So if you, just to kind of finish that point, if you were to make it, just for example, 10%, everyone pays 10%, there's no abatement, but your taxes settle somewhere like 10 to 15. Is that doable?
everyone would take that deal.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone would take.
And
that
you have
deal.
to do the same, do those income bands work? 75, 25, 70, 30?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, like I said, it's a fully taxed building in Manhattan. The real estate taxes are between 27 and 30% of the gross.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have an abatement, it doesn't pencil out. And so the reality is, 421A, like I said, is not, a giveaway. It's a response to a takeaway.
Yeah.
Because the 421A, it also artificially inflates the value of land, right? Because if you were to just take 421A away, and as you say, it's a man-made solution to a man-made
That's
situation.
correct.
But if you were to take it away, then just let land be land, right? Let it be worth what it's worth, because we would all pencil it that I can get X amount of income here. This is what it's going to cost to build. So what's left over is what I can pay you for that land.
Right. But you're also presupposing that there's not somebody who says, the hell with this, I'm just going to build a condo here. Right? And that person just builds a condo and says, here, everyone can pay their own taxes. I'm not taking this on. And I don't need to build affordable units. I'll just build a condo here.
So in that case, everything would go condo, and then you'd have a city
And I
of
think you
condos.
saw that after the 421A expired in 2000 and I believe 15 or 16, there was this huge bum rush of condo projects that got done in New York because you couldn't build rentals. So people were like, all right, well, people have to live somewhere.
Yeah.
That's happening now in Brooklyn as well.
Right.
Just way too much condos.
Yeah,
but if people will want the market automatically fix that then, because you've got too much condos, so there's no demand anymore for condos, whereas a lot of people still need places to live. So then the market would tell these developers, we actually need to build affordable now because we've saturated the condo
You
market.
would think, but I'm not a believer that the market over a short period is so efficient, right? People are greedy. People want money now. It's only been after pretty much my whole life in this business and living in New York my whole life. I don't even know how to drive a car. That's the truth.
That's a real New York.
Yeah, that's the truth. When I went to Ireland and was on the other side, I was like, oh, this is no problem. I don't know how to do this one. I don't know how to do that one.
When Americans land at the
Even-
airport, it's
right.
like they're taking
they have
their
to
lives
wear.
in
They
their own
make you wear.
hands.
They make you wear a rubber band. on
Yeah,
your
when you get onto the motorway
Right.
there, it says you're driving in the wrong direction.
Right.
If you go down the other way.
Well, they put the rubber band on you, and that helps people. But it doesn't matter to me. I can't drive
Well,
on this side of the road, and I can't drive on that side of the
It's
road.
just not driving.
I always tell people when I leave New York, it's usually just to go to the airport. I never really leave Manhattan very often, except for projects that I'm working on. But the reality is, over a short period of time, a developer is going to do what maximizes their return. And, now that I've been doing this for pretty much half my life, I try to take a step back and holistically, like, well, what's good for the city, right? I don't think it's good for the city, like, if everything became billionaires row. I don't think it's good for the city if, there's no income diversity. So I try to look, at a larger perspective, not, I don't want to come around and say, like, I have the greatest heart and I don't care about making a profit. I do, but I understand, like all of us do in the affordable business, it's sort of a long-term business. And so doing what's best for neighborhoods and the city usually comes back around to be a good investment.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, this is amazing. I mean,
Oh, well, thank you.
I feel like we really got into the weeds on the development project.
Thank you.
We've heard so much about you.
Oh, really?
We're big fans, and all the great work you do.
Thank you.
Got nothing but respect for anyone who takes on that amount of risk, and also, your legacy is, I think, going to be a really nice footprint in New York City.
Wow, I'm going to make sure my kids listen to this. Thank you guys for having me here today and being such wonderful hosts.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.
Cheers.